This happens a lot in real conversations. It's like, can we just jump to the end and can I leave while you're still talking? I've talked a lot about dialogue in the past, and I now realize most of that talking was technically dialogue. Dialogue can make or break an entire novel. Poor dialogue can ruin characters, it will disengage the reader, and limit the appeal of your writing. The best plot, the most interesting world, the most dynamic character will not be able to overcome poorly written dialogue. Bad dialogue sticks out like a sore thumb, or rather, it sticks out like somebody yelling about having a sore thumb. Today, we're talking about some characteristics of bad dialogue and how to turn them around so you can write good dialogue. If you'd like to add your own dialogue to this dialogue about dialogue, then please add a comment down below. Type it into the comment dialogue. All right, here we go. Bad dialogue thing number 1, excessive monologuing. Do you know what my foolproof first date strategy is? To deliver a 120-minute detailed description of my planned 15-book dark fantasy series. Surprisingly, I'm still single, but if someone can't stand me talking about my writing for 2 hours straight, then we don't have a future anyway, so... Monologues are usually a bad idea in a novel. They can get boring, and they often aren't that realistic, and they're usually a sign that there's some other problem going on in your story. Unless a character is getting up to deliver a speech or something, it's unlikely that other people involved in the conversation aren't going to be chiming in. One common source of monologues is the delivery of expository information. A lot of writers correctly realize that just delivering a dump of world-building information directly in the narrative is a bad idea. So instead of just delivering it directly through the writing, they have a character say that same info dump through dialogue. Now this helps a bit. It makes things slightly more natural, but having a character talk uninterrupted for 3 pages about the history of the village or how their donut-based magical powers work or how their grandfather emigrated to America is not really interesting. You always want dialogue to be an exchange between 2 or more characters and not just one character blathering on while another nods their head and says uh-huh a whole bunch of times. I had a 2-hour date last week that went like that. She hasn't texted me back. A character should make some statement and the other character should respond with a question or an additional piece of information. A character might be reluctant to give information. They might dissemble or try to mislead the other characters. Maybe the other characters have to really pry the information out of them. Your dialogue should always be a conversation, not just a dump of information that the character is effectively just telling the reader. Bad dialogue thing number 2, entering a conversation too early or leaving way too late. This happens a lot in real conversations. It's like, can we just jump to the end and can I leave while you're still talking? You have the luxury as the writer to enter and leave conversations at the optimal point. Do not feel obligated to show the whole thing. A chapter or scene can start with a dialogue exchange already in progress, and it can end before the conversation does. I've critiqued novels before where every scene starts with the character walking to a room, then finding the person they need to talk to, greeting them, going through all those motions, and then getting to the meat of the conversation. This is unnecessary and it wastes a lot of time, not to mention it's boring as hell. Get to the meaningful part of the conversation as soon as possible. Avoid greetings and small talk and just get to it. The reader will be okay if you don't show these parts of it. They can fill in the blanks of how these people came together and started talking. You can generally leave a conversation and move on to something else once you've delivered the important plot or character element that needs to be delivered with the conversation. Bad dialogue thing number 3, being too realistic. I think that, when people actually talk in real life, they stammer and pause and they'll talk in circles after stammering and pausing and things like that. Realism in dialogue is a little bit tricky. It is possible to write dialogue that sounds really unrealistic and mechanical. People can talk in ways that people don't actually talk, and that can be problematic and feel weird to the reader. You'll see this with things like maid and butler dialogue, where a character goes, "as you know," and then relates a fact that all of the characters already know. All that being said, matching your dialogue to how actual real world conversation goes can be equally as bad. Real conversation is not optimized for drama, and listening to it can be quite boring. Dialogue in a novel needs to be jazzed up to a degree. It needs to be trimmed of anything unnecessary, and capturing all of the inflection, the pauses, the poorly framed sentences, the backpedaling that happens in real conversation usually isn't necessary. Bad dialogue number 4, having purposeless conversations. If you have a corporate job, you probably spend all day in meetings with the sort of conversations that I'm talking about. We've touched on this with some of the other issues, but every conversation in your story needs to have some kind of purpose behind it. If the conversation doesn't deliver important plot information, if it doesn't do anything to exposit the setting, if it doesn't characterize any of the speakers, then why is it in the story? Every conversation should have a purpose. Doesn't have to be a big one, but it should do something. Even just setting up the mood or tone of a scene can be enough justification for a dialogue exchange. Always write a dialogue exchange to accomplish some sort of purpose. Don't just throw one in for the hell of it. It should advance the plot in some way. It should tell us something about the characters. It should reveal something about the setting. It should create a certain amount of emotion in the reader. And lastly, bad dialogue thing number 5, having too much or not enough dialogue. Different writers will write different amounts of dialogue. There is an element of style and personal preference that applies here. And it also varies by story. If you have a single character wandering the desert, they probably don't have a lot of people to talk to, so the story obviously is going to have less dialogue. All of that being said, I think you do want to pay attention to whether you've got enough or not enough dialogue. Too much dialogue can lead to things like white room syndrome, where you have 2 or more characters talking and there's nothing else going on in the scene, to the point where the scene might as well be taking place in a blank, empty white room. On the other hand, not having enough dialogue might mean your story lacks character interaction. If you're describing conversations but not using dialogue, it likely makes the story more telly, and the narrative won't be as close as it would be if you were using dialogue directly. Sometimes you do want to do this. Dialogue scenes take more time to get through because you have to describe the individual exchanges rather than just summarizing what a character says. But dialogue is a really good way to bring out your characters and amp up the emotional engagement of your story, so you want to have the right amount of it. Like many things in writing, it's not just about doing more of something. You have to do the right amount, and that applies to dialogue. The right amount of dialogue for your story is going to depend on how it's structured, your own personal preferences and strengths as a writer, and what kind of tone and mood you're trying to set. The ideal amount of dialogue is going to be different for every story, and it's something that you just kind of got to figure out. Just like this video was watched for you by the ideal amount of time, because you watched all of it. This is the end of the video. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.